Hey, moms. This conversation today with Isabel Tom is near and dear to my heart. Her message of helping kids value the older generation, and she gives actual ways to make that connection happen. This message is for everyone to hear, and I can't wait for you to listen in. Stay tuned. Hello, moms. Welcome to the Front Parking Spot podcast. I am so glad you're here. I'm Jennifer Bosma, wife, mom, grandma, former teacher for 23 years, and now a Christian children's book author and your podcast host. Are you a faith-based mom trying to live out a Christian life for your family? Do you want to learn more ways that you can have power over your child's spiritual growth? Inside this podcast, you will find tried and true ideas to grow in your faith and be the best wife and mom you can be. So listen in as you're cleaning up, doing the drive, or matching that sock, and be encouraged to know that God has his front parking spot set aside for you. Hello, moms, and welcome to the Front Parking Spot podcast. Today, I have Isabel Tom with us. She is a mom, wife, daughter, and retired granddaughter. Love that. She is also the author of The Value of Wrinkles, a young perspective on how loving the old will change your life. She has been featured on ABC7's Good Morning Washington and numerous radio shows and podcasts such as Building Relationships with Dr. Gary Chapman and AARP's Take On Today. Isabel grew up in a multi-generational household and took part in caring for her paternal grandparents, Mama and Yaya, who lived to 98 and 102. Professionally, she has served in the senior living and hospice care field. Isabel holds a Master's of Public Health from the University of Maryland. Welcome, Isabel, to the Front Parking Spot podcast.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me today. I'm so excited.
I love that you are here because this message so needs to be heard. And today we're going to be talking about helping kids value and connect with the older generation. This so has to be heard. Tell us about you and your story and your mission.
Well, I could talk for a very, very long time about this topic. I wrote a book about it, so
Yeah, you
I'll
did.
try to make it brief. But I'm a mom of 3 kids who are currently 8, 10, and 12. I'm a wife of Kevin. My husband's a teacher. And a huge part of my story is that I grew up living in the same household as my grandparents. My grandparents lived a really long time, so I had a lot of time with them. I lived with them in the same household until I was 26. So literally when I got married, I moved out, and they were happy, but they weren't that happy because they didn't want to say bye to me. And then even after I moved out, I was still very close with them, saw them very often. And I basically walked with them to the end of life. They were 98 and 102 when they passed. And I also had the chance to walk with my dad to the end of life too. So my background is in senior care, senior living, and end of life care. So there's a lot to that God has blessed me with those unique experiences to be able to have this perspective at a younger age, I would say.
Our heart is very lined because my grandmother, I lived with her until the night before. I lived with her. The night before I got married, we were both in twin beds, and I looked over and saw Grandma Elsie next to me in the twin bed because she lived with us as well. And then my mom is 91, and I just love going into senior centers. And when I was teaching, I would bring kids and we'd do dances and just have a lot of fun with them. But tell moms, what can they do? What can they do to foster that love for the older generation?
Yeah, I think the first place to start actually is just that it's valuable to spend time with older people. And I remember raising my kids. My kids are about 4 years apart, all 3 of them. And that was really hard for me, especially when they were younger. I would say now it's starting to get easier, but motherhood has been hard for me. And one of the things that I always struggled with was just feeling like I'm not good enough. I'm not able to get anything done. I can't do this. And one of the things that really comforted me is when I would go visit an older friend at a senior living community and I would bring my kids there, just going there kind of slowed me down and helped me gain this different perspective, a long-term perspective about what life is about. I just appreciate being around older people, older women, older believers, because they remind me of the truth, I would say. When you are caring for kids, it's just so It's chaos. It's overwhelming. I mean, sometimes you have kids yelling at you because you did something kind for them. This is personal, And so,
Right, right.
but, when I have been around older women, older moms, they remind me, that something may not be as catastrophic as I feel it is, or they just remind me to enjoy life more. Or even just this morning, I was reminded of the fact that, I get to do these things. I
Yeah.
have the health to be able to walk my kids to school. And that's just a huge blessing, just to know that just to be able to be slowed down and to have somebody who slows down enough in this frenzied life to look at you and give you that attention that I feel like we don't often get these days.
I love that. And you know what? When I see an older person, I just want to sit down and I'll say, "What is your life advice?" And they always have something to say because, they still feel like the person that the age we are. They
Yeah.
still feel that way in their head, but their body is slowing. And, so, moms out there too, if you can find there's a senior center at every corner, it seems. But,
Yes.
just to call and get a group of other moms and go and just talk with the seniors and get their advice.
Yeah. So I think you were talking about tips because I kind of like changed your
Mhm.
question a little bit. But
Right, right.
in
That's
terms of
okay.
in terms of tips, I would say there's a lot. I look at whenever I bring my kids to visit their grandmothers, or they're an older person, or I just bring younger and older generations together. One, if your kids are younger and you're afraid that, like, who knows what's going to happen, I want you to know that kids have a superpower, that the younger they are, they have the superpower that, like, really whatever they do, they are able to bless older adults. And so, I have brought my kids crying, throwing tantrums
Yeah.
down the hallway of a nursing home, and all these heads starts peeking out, right?
Mhm.
Because it's really amazing. Like, you feel like as a mom, you're like, wow, I'm doing good work. Because even when your kids just say hello, I would tell my kids when they were little, I would say, if you just say hello, or if you just smile and wave, guess what? You are going to make that lady's day. You're going to make
Yes.
it so good. And for kids who are older, if they just recognizing and acknowledging the presence of their grandparents, that's a huge blessing. Like, I have heard older women, older men, just they're beaming from ear to ear because they'll say, my granddaughter called me the other day and was telling me about how she's going to college and this and that. And it probably was like a 2-minute conversation. Yet that, that conversation had the ability to just really uplift that grandparent. So I feel like this is something that kids need to know. So I always try and remind kids, however old they are, whether a teenager, college, young adult, little 2-year old, you can have such an impact. You can have such a blessing. You can bless your grandparents so much.
And they're so appreciative, like you said. They're appreciative for that 2-minute conversation, or they're
Exactly.
appreciative for that picture. When you give a mom a picture, she has like 1,400 in a drawer somewhere, but if you give that to a grandparent, I mean, that
Yes.
picture will probably be there to the next month when you go
Yes.
back.
Yes, and I say, like, art, like all those piles of art that you're trying to recycle and hide from your children, you
Right.
take that and you bring it to a grandparent, and they will hang it up on their
Mhm.
refrigerator, and it will be like a reminder of how loved they are.
Oh, yes.
So,
Well, I love one of the questions that I saw here for you. And what do you see as the major challenges that parents face as they try to get their kids to appreciate, respect, honor, and interact with the grandparents, either their own or just people in the community?
yeah, so, I mean, there's a number of challenges. I think that's why when you put an older and younger person in the room, they don't naturally necessarily find that they have a lot in common. I think they do have things in common, but in many ways, they speak a different language, right? They are living in different generations. They have been brought up in different spaces. So I think there's the generational differences. I think nowadays people live further apart. They're not necessarily close by. And so that contributes to it. I think in terms of there I think sometimes this is something I see a lot. whenever I'm around older adults, they want to leave a legacy, right? And this
Mhm.
is something near and dear to their heart. So sometimes they'll start sharing their story.
Yeah.
But that story can be like 8 hours long.
Right.
And it's not necessarily like the older person, the grandparent hasn't necessarily worked on editing it to make it very succinct and brief and something that's easy for a younger child to listen to, or a child in general, or anybody to listen to.
Mhm.
So the attention span, when an older person talks to a younger person, sometimes it's not something that the younger person, they're able even to remember, or they lose attention very quickly. And so that's one of the reasons why I did something called the Grandkid Investigator Kit with my kids a while ago. And what I was trying to do was pull out interesting sound bites, because I know like my kids love finding out that like, oh, what type of hairstyle did my grandma used to do when she was younger? They want to know those types of details, or kind of like the Guinness Book of World Records types of facts. My son loves the weird but true facts from National Geographic, and
Right.
just reading this about this. Did you know this? Did you know this? And I feel like a lot of times those stories or those little tidbits are things that grandparents don't necessarily remember. It's been a while. And so they end up telling these long stories that make it really hard for kids to relate to their grandparents. So I really try and help kids to see that their grandparents, like, once they realize that there is like this whole gold mine of information about their life story, they can start asking questions. But I really try to help kids and even the parents to realize how much is there that we often haven't uncovered.
I love that because really when I even if moms when they're driving, if they start brainstorming, like what are some questions you would want to know of someone who's 90 years old? And I know one thing that I always found fascinating, I'm a huge history buff.
Yeah.
So, and my mom who's 91, I love asking her, "Mom, what do you remember about World War II?" And do you re then she'll talk about some of the things that they couldn't get, like, I mean, even, like, soap was hard to get, so they had to make it,
Oh,
and,
so cool.
I mean, just little things like that, I'll ask her that, or I'll ask her questions like, "Tell me, who did you date before grandpa?" And, like, just because they usually do remember back in the
Yeah.
day. They usually have a good long-term memory,
Mhm,
sometimes the
mhm.
short-term memory isn't as good, but so maybe moms, brainstorm some questions too if you are going, some questions going to visit a grandparent or going to a senior
Mhm.
center of things you can actually ask them to give more succinct answers and stuff. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I call moms and parents, I say they're the playmakers, they're the connectors. So when you can teach a mom the skills, like I do think that you need the skills to be able to connect your kids to their grandparents. You are so important in this relationship. Maybe
right.
you're not the actual one who's like, it's not the direct part, but you are a playmaker, whether it's you prompting and
Mhm.
asking questions like, if your son likes to fish you can ask grandpa like, hey, did you know that grandpa used to fish? Grandpa, didn't you used to fish before? And you
Yeah.
start that conversation to help them appreciate each other. It's the same way that you would help your child to make friends with another kid who's the same age on the playground. You might say something like, hey, Sam watches Wild Kratts. He loves animals. And the other child may say, oh, I like that too. So doing those things that help them to see that they do have a lot more in common
You
than
know,
they think.
And one thing I remember when I was with my grandmother when she passed away, she was about 93, and I
Mhm.
remember I was with her, and we were just praying sweet scriptures, and she was in hospice, so I knew her time was short, but I remember thinking, like, "Moms, you're so busy with folding the laundry and doing all the things," but I remember with my grandmother there, and I would sit and just look at her hands and know that those hands have loved my mom, loved me as a little baby, and I felt you learn the most about life when you're sitting with someone at their point of death.
Mhm.
And it was a beautiful moment to kinda like, moms, don't sweat the small stuff. Time goes so quick.
Yeah.
Enjoy your children when you're so busy and your house is a mess, enjoy that time, with your kids. Because when you see life, if we all have 100 years, it's a blink, you
Yeah.
know? And can you tell us anything more about that, seeing your grandparents live so long and
Yeah. So I worked in hospice care, and one of the things that I tell people is that so I had all three of my kids when I was working in hospice care, and I didn't directly work with patients. I did community education and professional education, and so, but still, I was like one step away from that. And so, when my kids, I birthed three kids in the span of 10 years, and I also walked you know, walked three people that I dearly love to the end of life. And I think when you're doing that at the same time, it really definitely puts things into perspective. So I remember when my dad, when he had a rare form of cancer, and I remember when he was no longer able to eat and it was really hard for him to eat, I was literally giving my son, his first spoon of avocado, or like letting him taste his first foods. And I think that puts things into perspective. It helps you appreciate
Yeah.
those moments. Same thing with, I mean, it's not a pretty part of aging, but being incontinent.
Mhm.
Watching somebody as they're aging, no longer, if some of your listeners aren't sure what incontinence is, it's like you can't, you've got to use an adult diaper now, right?
Right.
And I remember seeing that change when, my loved one needed to start using a diaper, and then changing my child, but then also teaching them how to be potty trained, and realizing this is number one, once you train a child to be potty trained, this is not small business. This is huge, right? This is something worth celebrating.
Mhm.
So it just puts a lot of things into perspective. When when you realize time is short, it
Yeah.
helps you appreciate what you have in front of you to say, okay, you know what, it's okay if it's a huge mess. I mean, sometimes it still gets to you, but it helps put things into perspective for sure.
And I talk to my sister a lot with our 91-year-old mom. I kind of feel like, when you're reminding her things again, and we always have to show her something, how to do a screenshot again. But the beautiful part about that is, moms, think about how your mom helped you. And like what you were just mentioning, Isabel, about how we were potty trained by our mom. Now it's time for us to give back to our older parent to help
Mhm.
them, because guess what? They did all that for us when we were little. They were wiping our booty.
Yeah.
We're not really wiping their booty, but we are, like,
Yeah.
helping them clean up, like, when they don't make it to the potty, and
Yeah. And I think another thing that I remembered too when I was caring for my dad and for my grandparents was there are times that it was really hard because you're just doing all the things. You're caring for kids, you're caring for your, an older loved one. But what you're doing also is you're setting an example for your kids. They're not going to know how to care for for you when you get older unless they've seen it. And a lot of people have never seen it. And so they don't even do it, right?
right.
So, and then as a Christian, it says to honor your father and mother. Well, you don't have to honor your father and mother just when they get sick. This is a very practical way, just staying connected with your parents as they get older and helping your kids get to know them.
Mm,
Even if you only see them a few times a year, it's okay. It's not the quantity, I would say, to focus on. I would say it's the quality. And your kids see the way that you treat your parents. And
yeah,
that's a huge point, like something that I was really convicted of making sure that I don't just tell my kids and help them connect. The way I do that is I have to do it myself. So every time I help my kids connect with their grandmothers, like it's a reminder to me, okay, are you being respectful? Are you honoring them? Are you thinking of them? All of that. So I think it's a huge piece of just setting the example.
oh, 1,000%. Because I wrote down when you were talking to Isabel about watching your comments, because your kids hear, like, when you hang up with your mom, they're gonna hear, "Oh, she just asked me that question 10 times. I've heard that story 3 times," or whatever. They're hearing what you're saying. And so moms, I really want you to remember the little ears in your car, in your audience, even to your husband, if your mom or dad say something for the 10th time, or, just to be patient, because that's how they're going to treat you when you're older.
Absolutely.
So good. Well, tell us, Isabel, I mean, your book, The Value of Wrinkles, and, tell people, how can they connect with you? Because this is so important for them to learn.
Well, yeah. So I'm on Instagram. My handle is at Isabel C. Tom. And you can also find me at valueofwrinkles.com. I actually have a free giveaway for any of your listeners, which is a free mission from my Grandkid Investigator Kit. And it's a great and fun way for kids to connect with their grandparents. So you can get that at valueofwrinkles.com/free mission. And that's a great way to connect with me. And I love meeting new moms and people all over, grandparents, everybody.
I've been on your website and I saw that investigator kit. That is super cute. And that is really great. I think it's really good for like, what would you say the good age? Elementary age, like fourth grade, third
I
grade?
say about ages 8 and up. You can
Okay.
definitely do it for younger, but you just have to help them read.
Right. Oh my
So make sure they can
goodness.
know how to read. But I have seen teens, it's been used to help teens when they go visit older people at like a senior living community. It's a way that kids can not feel so awkward. Like it gives them guidance on how to connect and how to find out the juicy details that make it really exciting and meaningful.
I love this, Isabel. Thank you so much for being here. You have given moms tangible advice and what to do. And this has been just a blessing of a conversation. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm glad to be here.
Well, mamas, thank you so much for joining in. I know you are super busy doing all the things that can consume your day, but you took a couple of minutes to learn how God wants to build you up in your faith, family, and life. And He wants to applaud you for this. Please subscribe and review my show. This helps other moms tune in as well. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram at Front Parking Spot, on Facebook at Front Parking Spot Mom Community, or my website at jenniferbosma.com. Have an Ephesians 3:20 type of day, mamas, and be encouraged as you go for the front parking spot in your life today. God bless.